Before we begin, I wanted to give a huge shout out to the folks at Amazon Music for partnering with us on this episode of the Inside Line F1 podcast. But more on this later. Right then, let's get right into today's episode. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Formula 1.5 review of the Japanese Grand Prix, because Max Verstappen has won and the story closes there, right? It does not, though, because on the Inside Line F1 podcast, our job is to basically look at those things that nobody has noticed and try to find a different perspective of that. And in the Japanese Grand Prix, there were so many things to talk about. Let's give you a quick insight into the race result. We saw Max Verstappen finishing P1, Sergio Perez second, a podium for Carlos Sainz, and notably, Yuki Tsunoda was also in the points. So that's a rough idea of the major stories from this race weekend. But among those is a very interesting story that we need to begin with first up. Sure, Verstappen has won. Sure, it's been, I don't know what, his 7,000th victory in a row, whatever it might be. I think fourth consecutive one, too. That's the number we're looking for. But the big story is, Kunal, the damned have now become the heroes. We used to criticize Ferrari strategy so much. I mean, I remember us making it a laughing stock on this very podcast. And for rightful reasons, because they ended up missing it up quite a fair few times. But here we are today, and it seems that Ferrari have outsmarted McLaren. Is this the same team we used to growing up with?
Well, it is the same team, just different people running the team. Fantastic race for Ferrari, even if the result doesn't really say so. 3-4, especially after they scored a 1-2 in Australia last time around. One of the reasons they could run this sort of a strategy was clearly one of the other things we made fun of was their tire degradation, that Ferrari used to be quick on Saturday and then would go backwards on Sunday. But their tire degradation is actually very, very impressive. And that's what allowed Charles Leclerc to do a one-stop strategy in the Japanese Grand Prix. Mind you, this was the one-stop strategy that Mercedes really wanted to try, gave it an attempt, and then aborted all throughout. And this is the same team, Mercedes versus Ferrari. Mercedes eventually beat Ferrari to second place in 2023.
And the same Mercedes that ended up beating Ferrari in 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20. It's times are changing, Sundaram. And at the Inside Line F1 pit stop that we had with our community partner Fan Code this weekend in Mumbai, we had over 100 people come in. And when we asked the same question, the gasp and surprise in hearing out the fact that Mercedes outsmarted McLaren, Ferrari outsmarted McLaren actually, that statement in itself carries so much gravity considering the circumstances of the last few years.
Absolutely. And the fact that we've seen Ferrari falter just way too many times over the past couple of years that this almost feels heroic to some extent. And there were two things that clearly impressed me. One was Ferrari, the other was Sergio Perez. We'll talk about him soon in some time. But I think Ferrari put in a very, very good strategy. I think that was something that made the race very interesting. We didn't see a lot of on-track battles based on pace, but I think it was a very strategic race. And I absolutely love it when we have these sort of races. We tend to see this in Spain. We tend to see this in Hungary. Different tire compounds, different strategies, different stint lengths. And when that happens, it all just comes together very well. So I think this was a very good race. I would give Ferrari 9 points out of 10, I would suppose. Leclerc should have done a little bit better in qualifying, but I think this was a good race and great job by Ferrari.
4 consecutive driver of the days for Ferrari, Kunal. Not bad, huh?
Really? Wow, I never knew that. I mean, I never...
Do you not count them? No.
Never. It doesn't matter. Does it give you championship points? No. Does it give you a contract extension? No. Does it give you a, payment bonus in the driver contract? Definitely no. So I definitely don't count them. I think the only time I remember this happened was when the fans conspired and they made Nicolas Latifi the driver of the day, or they at least had planned to, saying a good send-off gift for Mr. Latifi. But Sundaram mentioned a couple of things. Firstly, Ferrari's strategy, yes, spot on. They really messed up the Saturday. It wasn't so much so Leclerc, but it was Ferrari that messed it up. And like we did on, the reel that's pretty much blown up on Instagram on our handle. They just messed it up with Leclerc so badly that the single lap specialist looked very amateurish in whatever he did in qualifying. But I must say, I don't think it was the most interesting race from a Formula One perspective, right? Especially if you dig deeper. Because yes, there were overtakes. Yes, there were overtakes for the lead of the race, for the podium finishes, podium positions, for, there were lots of battles even for 10th place with Yuki Tsunoda sort of, mastered and so on. The truth is these battles were all, how do I put it? They were all based on a tire differential. Okay, and what was the tire differential? If Sundaram is on a 10-lap tire and I'm on a 2-lap old tire, I am going to overtake him purely just based on this. So it was not down to, drivers trying to battle each other and hold each other up. Of course, they tried to do that. But a lot of the battles were just over exaggerated by the tire differential, and the undercut was so powerful that even if you pitted one lap before all your rivals did, you had a very good chance of overtaking them or jumping them on track. And that's what it was. But well, that's what it is. It was still a great race. Suzuka is always fun. There's always something that's happening. The red flag, 17% chance of a red flag, actually came up just after the first lap itself, the first standing start as we call it.
How exactly did Charles Leclerc and Ferrari outsmart the McLarens? Well, eventually it was quite an interesting take for them, how they thought that after their poor qualifying, a longer one stop that would be somewhat risky would be the ideal strategy for them. Instead of running in all the dirty air, they could just go out up ahead, claim track position, hope that the deck is not that bad there, and then figure out where you recycle. And that recycling actually worked out quite well for Charles Leclerc, as he eventually ended up in the podium spots before Carlos Sainz eventually got that position. And that was quite a move by him to get that position in the end as well. And we saw lots of teammates working together, letting each other go past. But this is what Ferrari did. And eventually, dirty air, the hard surface, it all adds up into making a track that's very, let's say, not friendly towards the tires. And eventually that Ferrari strategy, pre-planned, yes, of course, in a way, but it played out in that regard. That worked out quite well for them. And at the end of it all, sure, Red Bull might have gotten a 1-2, but Ferrari might have to walk home as the happiest constructor of them all. Or will it be RB? It's a bit of a tough call, this, isn't it?
I think I would go with, Red Bull being the happiest constructor, or maybe Red Bull energy drinks, because they got, Red Bull Racing Bulls in the top 10 as well. But yeah, because 1-2, you mentioned 4 1-2s, that's been the trend. All 4 races of the season have seen 1-2 finishes from a particular team. Of course, Australia was where Ferrari took the 1-2s. But I would say, Red Bull was probably the happiest constructor because, Checo Perez struggled at this circuit last year. He was almost a second off. This time he was almost on pole. Both the drivers thought they had lots of errors on their laps, which cost them pole, or which, cost them more lap time. But Checo Perez drove a very good race to eventually get that 1-2 for Red Bull as well. So my money would still be on Red Bull Racing trying to just do everything else. And if they falter, I think it's clearly going to be Ferrari who will pick up the pieces.
But Sundaram, isn't it nice how the gaps are now only in the hundredths of a second in qualifying? And I find it fun how in the last F1 pit stop we had at Car Social for the Australian GP, in the post-race show, we asked a question, does Red Bull feel the need to change their second driver? And the sentiment there was overwhelmingly towards, yes, get Sergio out as soon as you can and bring someone like Daniel Ricciardo, Yuri Vips, or whoever it might be into the seat. A week later, actually a couple of weeks later, and there was no word about that, even though the same question was asked. And by the way, we were amongst the other people as well who had the same sentiment as well. It's not just the attendees, but also the two of us. And it's all a flick of a switch.
And that's how we as fans sometimes tend to look at the sport differently from how teams see it. We often want the best team and the best drivers to be battling against each other. And I think Sergio Perez received a lot of flack last year for not being able to compete on the same level as Max Verstappen. And that's why 2023 was supposedly boring. But the reason why it was a little bit more monotonous was the other teams not being able to have the same pace as Max Verstappen. But from Red Bull's perspective, he had gotten enough points to finish P2 in the championship. They got the Constructors' Championship. They got the Drivers' Championship. So there was no real reason for them to remove Checo Perez. And luckily, this weekend, Checo Perez managed to put in a very impressive performance. I really, really have to say that. Kunal said he struggled last year. I think that's he's put it in a very subtle way. I think he had a torrid 2023 race in Japan, and the way he had multiple penalties. He came back after 25 laps to escape the grid penalty. It was probably one of his worst races, and coming back this time, I think he's put in a good statement that, hey, I'm back and I'm going to hold on to my seat.
Since we are talking of qualifying, I'm actually going to add some context here, because just how close was qualifying? We know it was 66 hundredths between Checo Perez and Max Verstappen. I was seeing the onboard comparison laps and the telemetry. Just when exiting the 130R, Checo Perez was actually 4 hundredths up on Max Verstappen. Okay, and Max Verstappen just braked late and whatever, and then took that pole lap. But again, there are some interesting gaps, because Fernando Alonso again punching way above the weight as he normally does, out qualifying the position of the Aston Martin for all 4 races in a row. I think except for maybe Australia, where he made a mistake. He said, in Q3, I took so much risk that it worked out. In Australia, I didn't, right? And he said, I was so much on the edge. He was just 4 thousandths of a second behind Carlos Sainz, right? Oscar Piastri, 7 hundredths again. Hamilton, 6 thousandths of a second in 7th place. Charles Leclerc, 2 hundredths of a second behind them. So that's how close qualifying is. And like a lot of drivers pointed out, especially in the Aston Martin, McLaren, and Mercedes battle, since the 3 of them are literally, neck to neck, it's track position and qualifying that's making a big difference in the race. And that's where the driver difference actually comes in. And yes, I think Checo Perez, great driver difference. And Samuel, actually, you found out a very interesting reason why Checo Perez has probably just gotten all up very nicely in 2024, apart from what Helmut Marko said, that he is delivering because 2025 contract negotiations are on right now. But what was that one reason that you found out?
So Sergio said to the media that he's trying not to invent, which says a lot. Because in a Formula One car, you might be puzzled into thinking, what do you mean invention? What's he talking about? It means driving style, the way the car behaves. Every driver has a certain way of working with the car. Some like to brake later, some like to brake earlier, some like to turn in later, some like to turn in later, and so on and so forth as you go with how you behave with the car. It might have been that Sergio Perez was trying to drive the car last year like Max, which is away from his natural muscle movement, natural style of working with the car. And suddenly, after a year full of self-doubt, after questioning who he really is, and in a way, after having a racing driver identity crisis about what is my style actually all about and what's the faster one, Perez apparently, according to himself, has reverted back to his original way of doing things. And although it says to me that he's settled back down into knowing where he is, that dream perhaps for P1 has died down, and I wouldn't say rightfully so, but we could see that the results were very much inclined towards Max. But in a way, this acceptance that my style is the one that will get me the best I can possibly do is probably going to be better for him, instead of focusing on what's the style to beat Max. Because I think looking at last year, it's quite clearly not his own style. Perhaps it's something that Sergio does in himself that will allow him to beat Max. But that's the interesting insight that Sergio himself has revealed. And it says so much about a driver's psyche. I mean, think about it, right? It's almost like having an imposter syndrome, Sundaram, where you're starting to question not just your driving style, but also yourself. Am I good enough to do this? Is my style good enough to do this? Can I beat Max? Can I beat Max with this style, with this car, with this way of driving, with this style of braking? Imagine the overthinking it must have caused him. For him to now settle down and say, right, I'll do things my way. And it's working. Thank goodness.
No, you're exactly right. And I think where it went wrong for Sergio Perez last year was probably Miami, where he started on pole, and despite having the advantage of starting 9 positions or 8 positions ahead of Max Verstappen, he lost that race. And then thereafter, there was something or the other always going wrong for Sergio. Either he was going past track limits, or either his engineers were not setting him out on the right time during qualifying. There was always something or the other that was not working for him. So then that ends up going... There's a break in momentum. He has low confidence. You really start doubting yourself, and then by the time you kind of regroup and recollect, the whole campaign's done. And we've seen this sort of trend happening with even someone like a Valtteri Bottas at the start of a year when they've hit the reset button, they tend to do well in the initial races. Once the upgrades come in or once there's a bad result, it all snowballs once again. So Sergio Perez has had a good race so far. Let's wait and see if he's able to be consistent over the next couple of races, and let's hope all those issues of last year or the previous years, they don't end up coming back once again.
I like it though, no, Kunal? It's good competition, just like in the background where there are so many good drives this weekend. Is it the right time to ask this question though about the drive of the weekend? Because we clearly are looking at Sergio Perez as one candidate. I am also looking at Logan Sargent. Let's all appreciate everyone's small wins, guys. Let's not be very rude to each other. Everyone has a different scale and scope in life, and every achievement differs depending on what level you are on. So let's celebrate everyone's small wins. Logan Sargent had 2 passes today. Hey, victory. No, but in all honesty, it's...
And Logan Sargent finished the race. He finished the race.
Which,
in comparison to Alex Albon, ever since Alex Albon's moved to Williams, he's never finished a Japanese Grand Prix. And in the last 3 Japanese Grand Prix, he's completed a total of 26 laps.
wow.
Logan Sargent has done more laps than Alex Albon had in Japan.
That's a strange and weird stat in itself. But Logan Sargent, it is. Yeah, he had a very lousy crash in free practice, but good to see him finish the race in Alex Albon's car, where literally Alex Albon also crashed his own car. So people getting the context would know that Alex Albon's repaired chassis from Australia was actually given to Logan Sargent for China. So Logan still doesn't have a car, even though he's paying a lot to have a car, but that's just the way it is. My drive of the weekend, I would say my drive of the first 4 race weekends, if I may just be a little too bold with that, is what do you say? Yuki Tsunoda. Clearly, he's at 2 back-to-back race points finishes, which is, by the way, equals his maximum race points finishing streak. Streak. I don't know why I said streak, but the key part here is each time there has been an opportunity to qualify in the top 10, Yuki has taken it. And each time there's been an opportunity to score points in the top 10, again, Yuki has taken it, right? And to give you an example, in Bahrain, we had Lance Stroll creating an opportunity in the top 10. Yuki, of course, was 19th. Nico Hülkenberg took that 10th place. Okay. But after that, in the 3 races, Saudi Arabia, Australia, and Japan, Yuki Tsunoda has been in Q3 in all those races. Okay. In Saudi Arabia, it was at the cost of Oliver Behrman, who was standing in for Carlos Sainz, as we know. In Australia, it was Lewis Hamilton who created the Q3 spot. And then again, in Japan, it was Lance Stroll who created that Q3 spot, and Yuki took it. And that's why Yuki Tsunoda is my driver of the weekend. And remember, he overtook 3 cars in the pit lane. Right. So that was, of course, down to his strategy. That was down to his crew. But that was also down to him stopping in his marks. Also down to him not faltering in that pressure moment. And Yuki Tsunoda, again, made overtakes on track at places where we've almost never seen drivers overtake. Okay. So he was pulling off all those moves. And very interestingly, in the pre-race media meeting, Yuki Tsunoda told all of us, saying, I'm actually bored of this circuit. And remember, he's, a driver. English is not his first language. So he didn't really mean that. And all the other drivers, Max Verstappen included, saying, are you serious? Because every other driver said, this is our favorite circuit. It's the best driver circuit ever, Sector 1, And Yuki Tsunoda said, actually, I've driven way too many laps here. And then he started doing a count. Maybe I've done 1,000 or 2,000. He said, maybe I've done 10,000 laps around Suzuka, because the Japanese Formula 4 that he was driving in was running around Suzuka as well. And then he gave a very interesting lap time insight that the Japanese Formula 4 car was 45 seconds. Mind you, I'm going to repeat it, 45 seconds slower than a Formula 1 car on a lap around Suzuka.
10 seconds per formula? Not bad.
Or 10 seconds per corner or something.
But on the drive of the weekend, Sundaram, you had something very interesting that we discussed on the way back from our event. Who would you pick in this spot? You had something to say.
Oh, I'm going with Charles Leclerc. I am definitely going with Ferrari today because I was so massively impressed with what they were able to do. I mean, leave qualifying aside, today they checked all the boxes and they implemented a very good strategy. And I think, like I said earlier, Leclerc made the race interesting for me. I mean, on a day where it was a lot more hotter than in the previous 2 days when it was a lot more overcast. They were preparing for some sort of showers that were expected. It did not rain at all. So there was higher degradation than there was expected. Leclerc was able to manage his tires very well. I think he was in the lead for just 4 laps, but still, he managed to almost double the stint on the mediums that McLaren and Norris were able to do, and that put him within the podium positions. And if not for Carlos Sainz coming up with fresher tires, I definitely think he deserved a podium. So at least for me, I'm going with Charles Leclerc. He made today's race very, very interesting for me, at least.
Yeah, and that too, like I said at the start of the show, to do a one stopper at a circuit like Suzuka where everyone else is two stopping is pretty phenomenal. But Sundaram, you made a very interesting point that in qualifying, the conditions were actually cold, which favored McLaren and Mercedes a little more with their tires, right? But today it was hotter and it actually brought Ferrari back into play with regards to the circuit temperatures and so on. And yes, one thing that Frederick Vasseur has changed, at least now, is there is a lot more confidence into what Ferrari is able to deliver, and it's just a matter of time that they're able to sort of make this their new baseline, because I still think they are clearly number two and maybe challenging Red Bull if the circuit's characteristics go away from them, especially if there are front limited and graining and so on, and that suddenly just artificially costs Red Bull performance.
And that's the best part, right? You see these little races here and there, kind of like in Australia's every now and then, where you see other teams challenging, which makes it so much fun. But on this whole subject about drivers and their drive in context of their entire race weekend, Leclerc was good, Tsunoda was great, Sainz was quite good as well. Oscar Piastri, probably not the best. Let's touch upon him very quickly before getting to Mercedes. And let's ask the question, why was he not as good as Lando Norris? Because on this whole battle between them, sure, Lando got the upper hand in qualifying, which eventually makes a huge difference. But in the race as well, one very interesting observation that we noticed was that after their first pit stop, Piastri and Norris only had a 1 lap difference in terms of tire age. Norris's tires were 1 lap younger than that of Piastri, but still, Piastri was lapping roughly 4 tenths, 3 tenths, 5 tenths slower than Lando Norris on an average per lap. And that says quite something. Now, we've been tracking this since last year, and there are so many races, especially the longer ones, kind of like your Qatar Grand Prix and the likes, where we've noticed that Oscar Piastri tends to trail off. Some experts and some paddock journalists have said that it's tire management. Piastri himself has said that he's not able to manage them as well. But I find it interesting how this whole cycle is still carrying on, Kunal, even though it's been 1 year in Formula One. And it's hard to quantify how early or how late a driver should learn tire management, but clearly that deficit exists, and it exists hard.
It does, and like Mark Webber said, he knows how to drive a Formula One car fast. He's just learning how to drive a Formula One car slow these days, which is the truth. Because Charles Leclerc actually said on the radio, which probably will never get played out, was, "What shit are these tires?" Because these Pirelli tires, they needed a lot of management. Max Verstappen said that they needed management over a pole position lap. Now, can you imagine that? That's how terrible these tires are, and then you're expecting a driver who's won F4, F3, F2 to suddenly come in and learn these tires when it's not as easy, right? Franz Tost, who we've been in queue to get on the Inside Line F1 podcast, literally said, for a driver to excel in Formula One, you need to give them 3 seasons, right? Oscar Piastri is not even halfway through that 3-season mark, but whatever he's shown is actually good. And if we were to just sort of look at what I said about track position, right? Piastri lost out to Russell on the last lap. Why did he lose out? Because he chewed up his tires while chasing Fernando Alonso. Why was he not able to attack Fernando Alonso? Because A, overtaking is tough, and B, like I said, track position is very, very vital when it comes to these battles between McLaren, Aston Martin, and Mercedes, right? So these are proofs of what we're trying to say, that it's actually playing out on track. It's not just us sharing opinions, right? So it was just down to that Oscar Piastri just didn't have the track position when he would have probably needed it. And I'm looking on the side because I'm trying to see the tire information that I have. And let's remember, it's Fernando Alonso. It's probably the most difficult driver to overtake on track in all of Formula One for the last 20 odd years that he's been around. So that's why, Oscar Piastri, let's just give him a break. But there was Oscar Piastri and George Russell. George Russell was released in qualifying. Wasn't it qualifying? Just in the tracks of Oscar Piastri. I am surprised that Piastri did not get a penalty for that, because clearly what Russell was doing was he was looking at his steering wheel, making adjustments, not expecting anybody else to be in his way because it's George Russell. I think Oscar Piastri should have just very well gotten a penalty for it, the way they gave Fernando Alonso a penalty last race for Australia. By the way, that didn't fly, did it? Because it was all full of sarcasm. So I need to just work on my delivery better.
Yeah. I was wondering if you got the names wrong. Okay. You clearly had me confused.
Crazy. But that's McLaren. And, I like that the banter is slowing now, because Fernando Alonso also had something very hilarious to say, as he always tends to. Funnily enough, Fernando Alonso went to the media after the race and said, "I think I had one of my best performances in the recent times, but nobody will remember it tomorrow morning." Why is he feeling so sad, Sundaram? What's your favorite driver on about? Like, what's the downbeatness about? He said
What
that
exactly
I had
did he say?
one of my best performances in recent times, but nobody will remember it tomorrow morning. Something's gone wrong. I mean, it takes a lot to discourage someone like Fernando Alonso.
He's been saying this a lot in the last couple of years. One good qualifying session with an Alpine, he says, "This is my best qualifying session of my career." One good race with Alpine or Aston Martin, he says, "This is the best race of my career." He's quite clearly looking past Valencia 2012 or Imola 2005-6. So I don't know the sort of zone that he's in, but once again, you tend to see the brilliance that this guy tends to do in the car. Today, he managed to push Oscar Piastri closer towards George Russell. To give Oscar Piastri DRS towards in the latter stages of the race. And that's just typical Fernando. And I think he went to the media after the race and said, "I have to be disqualified from the championship for my moves. I think I was doing some risky moves today as well." Always very, very cheeky. Typical Fernando.
But guys, literally hats off to Fernando Alonso, because that Aston Martin is a P4, P5 car, which is either, 8th, 9th, 9th, 10th. That's where it typically should be. But Fernando Alonso has managed to qualify 6th, 4th, and 10th in Australia, where he admitted, he took too much of a risk, and then 5th again. So he has been putting that car in places it doesn't deserve to be. But that's pretty much been the hallmark of Fernando Alonso. Hasn't it been so?
No, it's been the hallmark of the entire Aston Martin team. I think even Lance Stroll put a car in places. Even Lance Stroll puts cars in places where they aren't supposed to go. That delivery didn't work out. We'll do it again for the short form content. Even Lance Stroll ends up putting the car in places where it isn't supposed to go anyway. And today, sorry, I just need to compose myself before I let this one out. It's like they're playing a game of anything you can do, I can do better, right? Remember that at Sundaram where we had Lewis and Fernando back in 2007? It's just a little bit different this time with the teacher and the master, because Lance Stroll said, "Master, if you can touch the barrier and leave a corner, I can do something similar as well." Touched the barrier in Saudi Arabia, failed. This time, he thought, okay, if Fernando Alonso can say GP2 engine, I can do something similar as well. Here we are with his latest comment. Can you enlighten us about what Monsieur Stroll has had to say today? Oh, wait, Kunal, what was it?
Yeah.
What?
He said, I don't have power on the straight. It seems like I'm driving another Formula or something like that. Which clearly was his way of saying GP2 engine, Probably needs to learn from Fernando how to deliver the best message in the fastest way. That too at a circuit where Fernando actually did use the words GP2 engine. So he could have just used that and commemorated Fernando for what it was. But then Mercedes would have gone absolutely berserk with Aston Martin. And remember, Mercedes, I think, also owns stake in Aston Martin Lagonda, the road car company. So lots at stake, not just at Aston Martin Formula One team, but also the road car company.
Is it Mercedes or is it Toto who has shares in
It's
Aston Martin?
Mercedes.
It's Toto, right?
No, it's Mercedes, I think. Yes,
Mercedes?
because Mercedes also supplies road car engines to Aston Martin.
Okay, but I don't think so. Lance is really gonna care as much, or
Of course, he doesn't
because
care.
I mean,
Otherwise, he'd have gone quicker.
Aston Martin's gonna have Honda engines in 2 years' time. But yeah, the same comment at the very same track that happened almost 10 years ago.
That cost Fernando the big job at Honda several years and whatever.
Yes.
But yeah, GP2 engine for all of those tuning in or hadn't tuned in back then, didn't get the references, I would say. But clearly, Lance Stroll, can you imagine? He actually got overtaken by Nico Hülkenberg in the closing stages of the races. So while Fernando Alonso is fighting at the top with the top 5 teams, Lance Stroll has decided to fight with the bottom 5 teams. And then he would turn out and tell the media, hey, I'm at least in the fight.
Sorry, did you say decide to fight?
I mean, clearly, right? If you Lance Stroll was actually not involved at all in the Daniel Ricciardo Alexander Albon incident, which I think we should talk of because, that opening race, red flag, whatever, Albon, very brave. Ricciardo, what happened? Whatever happened to that spatial awareness that drivers have, they're aware of what's happening. Was Albon in the blind spot of his rear view mirrors? Maybe that was the case. But, on a WhatsApp group, which the 3 of us are part of, along with some 80 other motorheads, somebody said Alexander Albon was silly to be there. I completely don't believe that. Yeah, because if you're a racing driver, you see your driver ahead actually going slower, creating a gap for you. You go for that gap. And I liked how Daniel Ricciardo put it. He said Alexander probably didn't want to go there, but he just found himself there, and either way, it's just one of those things where Williams just ends up crashing. And then everyone keeps asking them about a spare chassis and other spares and whatever and so on. Which, by the way, Alpine is another team that doesn't have a spare chassis. Just that they aren't really ending up racing even in Formula 1.5 because both their drivers had contact in today's race, even though they're racing for like positions 30 and 32, whatever. And they finished 26 seconds behind the Sauber in the race. Can you believe? I know I've just switched on lots of talking points here, but yeah, spare chassis, Alpine, Williams, crashes, Ricciardo, Albon, lots that I just spoke of.
I think it's also going to be a very tricky situation for Williams to turn up in China with 2 working or functional chassis. They gave the spare chassis to Alex Albon this weekend. He crashed out of it and he's supposedly damaged that one as well. And they have to go on a huge recovery and repair job before China. It's also possible that we might end up with one car, and again the question is going to be who's going to be driving that car. Are they going to go the other way around and give the car to Logan Sargent this time and say, yeah, take the spare chassis, drive in China, you've deserved it?
But was the chassis damaged? Because Albon actually said post-race that he turned around, looked under, and he noticed that there wasn't much damage, luckily, to the tub itself, and that it wasn't as bad because there were tire barriers. He was saying, I can't remember when last I saw tire barriers at a Formula One circuit, right? Because they were under the tire. His car was under the tire barriers out there. But either way, Williams will figure it out. They've got that American money and Doralton and whatever to jump into when they have to.
Maybe.
Now, James Vowles had to come out and give out the same press release and say that, yeah, we've had a damaged chassis and it's gone back to the factory for repairs. So, same story just 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
My God. Guys, I'm thinking, right? We need to be kind for Christmas, don't we? How about we all chip in a bit of money? Just maybe start a fundraiser or something. Let's just give them a chassis, yeah.
Just a little.
I think they need one badly. It's like a kid trying to survive on one piece of underwear. It just can't happen, man. You need to wash it sometimes. It's crazy how it's working out for Williams. We need to talk about steak though as well. Because pit stops are fun. Pit stops are complicated. Pit stops are fast. Not so much if unfortunately you happen to be the team in green and black. Another slow stop for Zhou Guan Yu this time out. And let's do some digging here, right? Let's do some really nerdy stuff because we had this conversation right before recording. And I was very, very curious to know what could the issues be. Now, to a layman like me, cross-threading doesn't make a lot of sense. English isn't really my first mechanical language. I talk mechanics in Hindi mostly. But what's it all about? What's the issue here with the stake pit stops? And why can it not be fixed until May, which is the deadline they've given, by the way? It's crazy.
What happens is pit stops are really quick. They're really important. As you saw today with Racing Bulls, they jumped 3 cars in the pit stops with Yuki Tsunoda. Now imagine if you were Sauber and your fastest pit stop was 4 seconds. You would have probably never made those positions, right? But going to pit stops, even pit stops need the latest of equipment, latest of software, latest of sensors. That comes at a cost. That's what also goes under the budget cap. So the teams have to make a choice, where do you want to invest the money? And for example, Mercedes last year didn't have the fastest of pit stops, if you guys remember, and that was conscious because the team had decided to put their money on the car, right? So that's what eventually happens even with pit stops, right? So that's where I'm guessing Sauber is going through some upgrades, getting the tech in place, and hence then the processes will fall in place because it's the same people who did the pit stops. It's not the people who's gotten slower. It's just that the uncertainty around is higher because of the tech being the way it is. But they actually had a 4-second pit stop, which is for Sauber standards not too bad, I would say, guys.
Really?
I'm serious. Wow.
You are?
No, isn't it?
Is it not? Oh yeah,
I mean,
because
imagine.
They're getting
exactly
better.
because
They're
our
getting
colleague
better.
Nityanand, who digs up these amazing graphs and stats on the Inside Line Instagram page and the Twitter page as well, by the way, was able to create this average pit stop timing graph. And if my memory serves me correctly, Sundaram, the average time for stake was 5 seconds, right? In the last 3 races, something thereabouts.
So they've slashed a whole second, and a whole second in terms of performance in Formula One is a lot, but actually on track, not in the pits. But they're getting there. They're getting there slowly and steady.
I think the bets will just keep on getting better for them. But last thing to talk about, let's drop the bombshell. Lewis Hamilton, an 8-time... sorry.
Wait. Before you go to Hamilton, I actually just opened up that graph because it's a very crucial graph. Okay. Average pit stops after the first 3 rounds, average pit stops, 14.4 seconds. He actually didn't remove the outliers because you needed these outliers. This is for stake, right? Racing Bulls is actually even worse, 6.7 seconds. And Alpine was 4.833. And if you take the median, if you're the one who prefers a median, Sauber is 4.3 seconds. So they were still at the median this race itself, just so you know. But yes, we should talk of Lewis Hamilton because very interestingly, he just came up out of nowhere and he asked, should I just let George buy? And there was no context to it before or after the race, but Lewis actually delivered some context after the race. At the second restart, the standing restart that happened, where Lewis took on the hard tire, he had contact with Charles Leclerc, which caused damage, and Lewis was understeering a lot at that time, so he was not able to pick up the pace. So that's when he turned around and said, if George is anyway quicker and he doesn't have damage, let him just go. So that's the context. It's got nothing to do with the fact that Lewis is going to race for Ferrari in 2025 and the team just decided out of nowhere, you're there, just let George go. Thank you.
I was surprised. All of us, we were just so confused, like, Is this coming from a world champion? Is this coming from a Formula One driver letting his teammate to go past? But they genuinely were... I'm not going to use the words we used at the event, Sundaram, don't worry. They genuinely were... they were all right. They were all right. Let's put it that way. They're all right.
They're all right. They're all right. But like Kunal said, context is always important, because otherwise, if we were sitting and scratching our heads as to why would Hamilton say such a thing, but if he's had some sort of damage or if he's had some sort of performance loss, then it kind of makes it just very straightforward and fair that he gives over that position to Russell and see if he can make a chance out of it.
Exactly, and that is what we saw with Mercedes. A quick word on why they didn't work out very well. I think not much is left to be said about it, right? Or
they tried doing something after the first red flag, and I think three-fourths of their time into the race, they kind of realized that this wasn't going to work. So then they switched from a one-stopper to a two-stopper. They added one more late pit stop at the end, and they couldn't salvage anything out of it. So they finished largely where they started from. But it was a little sad to see Mercedes literally a second and a half, 2 seconds down on the other competitors and getting passed by so easily. Not the best of sights for a team that's won so many races and titles in recent years. But I really hope they're able to turn this around and be a little bit more competitive. It's not nice to see Mercedes in this situation.
I mean, that way I'd say it's not nice to see the other 8 teams in this situation. Can we just have all the 8 teams competitive enough? But let me add some numbers to your Mercedes point, Sundaram, some context. Mercedes, George Russell finished 7th, 45.9 seconds after Max Verstappen. Right, that's how low he finished. And this is what Toto Wolff actually said post-race. He said, now it's just live testing for us. We found some performance. We're going to go in that direction. So we are just following that direction. A lot of data is pointing us in that direction, even if the results don't reflect this way. And I can't wait to go racing in Shanghai. Right, this is what he said. And like you pointed out, Mercedes actually tried to do the one-stopper. So they over-managed their hard tires, and then they realized that the one stopper is just not going to work. And if I remember there were lots of nice overtakes, but every time I think of a good overtake, it was always a Mercedes car being overtaken. And that's also pretty embarrassing for Mercedes, I would guess.
I don't know.
We have to give credit to Sergio Perez over here. I think he gave us 2 very good overtakes from this race.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good plug as well on the inside line of 130R.
Nicely done, my friend.
Yeah, and he did it twice.
But
generally a very good overtake.
Yeah, adding more context to Mercedes, and I can't stop it. We should have done this at the start of the show. Anyway, we have 98% of the people who listen till the very last minute, till Soumil literally says, and that's it, guys, and then people don't listen to the ending tune.
But there is a reason why we're doing this at the back end, which is clearly because if the performance belongs to the back end of the top half, well, we should probably we can take our liberties, can we not?
Yes, can we not? George Russell turned around and said, the last 3 circuits haven't suited the strengths of our car. That's 75% of all the races that have happened this season. I don't know what to really say. But this is where if Aston Martin had 2 drivers scoring points, Mercedes would have found themselves in a bit of a spot, being beaten by not 1, but 2 customer teams this season.
Wouldn't that make them... Oh no, Williams also have Mercedes. Sorry, I forgot briefly. I just thought they would be the last Mercedes powered car. That would be sadistically funny the way it would have worked out. But it's a bit sad just to see the sight of a silver car around Suzuka passing people once and then falling out of sync altogether. I mean, yeah, that's my 2005 memories. Whatever little ones I have as a 2-year-old are starting to fade away in a negative light. But that's all that we have from this weekend, ladies and gentlemen. That's our Japanese Grand Prix review. There is another race coming up soon. It's going to be the Chinese Grand Prix coming up. And if you are around India, there's one particular city where we're trying to get to for China. So stay tuned. The Inside Line F1 Pit Stop, we're trying to bring it to more places than just Car Social, which, by the way, has been a lovely venue to this weekend's pit stop as well. And on that, I'd seriously like to thank Fancode for providing such amazing merchandise for our winners. They got to win incredible caps from the Formula One store that they have as well. And they also got season-long passes to watch Formula One literally for free if they won the quiz. And 3 people ended up doing that quite well. So thank you for everyone who attended that event. And yeah, can we reveal more? We can't reveal more, no? I don't think we can.
No, we shouldn't. We should look out for social media. But one word of thanks to Fancode. They brought Formula One back to India, which is fine, which any broadcaster could have. The Japanese Grand Prix was actually available. A full weekend's broadcast was available for 30 rupees, which is less than 4 cents of a dollar. Why am I stating this? Is because Formula One over the years was actually built on free-to-air television. Okay, that's what Bernie Ecclestone did. Then he put it behind a paywall. Everyone started making money. Television contracts went up. We know all of that. But the audiences dwindled when it went behind paid TV. That's also known, right? 30 rupees to watch a Japanese Grand Prix broadcast over a weekend is as good as free to air, even though it's just on a live streaming app, etc. It is literally as good as free to air. So fantastic stuff by our friends at FanCode.
And if you're anyone in India who still doesn't want to pay, guys, just pay. Come on. There's no need to use illegal streams anymore. It's only $30 a weekend. On top of that, if you attend our pit stops, there's an even further discount for the entire season as well. Why do you want to use pirated streams? Just pay the money. It's not a lot.
You could actually watch the whole season on FanCode for the cost of one coffee at Starbucks. The whole season.
No, mine's more. I just take the larger one. It's okay. Just
Okay.
kidding. But yes, this is not a fan code advert,
Okay.
guys. We're literally, this is not an advert. It's just genuine support and gratefulness for the kind of stuff they're doing, and we're glad that we get to work with them as well eventually, which is incredible. But that's all from us this weekend, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in, and follow our social media for more short form content and more insights about where the next F1 pit stop will be. See you there, folks. Take care. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Inside Line F1 podcast. Before we ended, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Amazon Music once again for partnering with us on this episode of the podcast.